Sometimes the body doesn't wake with you. It pulls you back, tight, sudden, certain. A sharpness in the calf, a twist in the night, a message sent through pain because nothing else was quiet enough to be heard. The body speaks differently after 70. Not with volume, but with pulses, pinches, a tightening where there used to be silence. Leg cramps feel like a nuisance, a nightly inconvenience, a muscle misbehaving. But often they're not random. They're a message, delivered through nerves and vessels and the quiet chemistry of sleep. And if we lean in instead of pushing them away, we might hear something gentler underneath. A request for presence, a call for rhythm, a reminder that the day doesn't begin at sunrise, but in how the body is received the night before. 1. Leg cramps. As memory and magnesium. Joan used to wake slowly. Her mornings were built from memory. The smell of the curtains, the click of the lamp chain, the way her feet searched for slippers without needing to look. But the past few months, something new arrived before dawn. A sharp clutch in her calf, a twist that dragged her out of sleep like someone pulling her by the ankle from a dream. She never screamed, but she winced, pressed her hand into the mattress, waited for the pain to pass like weather. It always did. But it left behind a kind of hesitation, a reluctance to trust her own legs when she stood. At first she blamed the way she slept, the position, the blankets, then her water intake, salt, age, anything that didn't require listening deeper. Then one night, the cramp came during a dream about her mother standing at the kitchen sink, wringing out a towel with arms that never trembled. Joan woke not just in pain, but with the weight of something unspoken, not grief exactly, more like a hunger for strength she assumed she still had. At her next checkup, she mentioned the cramps. Her doctor paused, asked her gently, "Are you eating enough greens? Seeds? A bit of dark chocolate here and there?" She raised an eyebrow. He nodded. Magnesium supports the quiet parts of movement, the signals between nerves and muscles that keep you fluid through sleep. That night, she steamed spinach, sprinkled pumpkin seeds over oats, placed one square of dark chocolate beside her tea, not as indulgence, but as a kind of communion. Before bed, she stretched her toes toward the ceiling, rolled her ankles in circles like stirring memory. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, and her sleep stopped being something she braced for. Now, when she wakes, her legs feel like hers again. Not punishment, but continuation. And sometimes, when she eats that square of chocolate, she whispers thank you to a body that remembered what she had forgotten to give it. 2. Circulation, cold and quiet, walking. Lester never liked winter, the stillness, the way the air felt like it folded in on itself. But this year, it wasn't just the cold outside, it was inside his legs. They began to speak more often, in tightness, in sudden seizing just as he turned in bed. He rubbed them, grimaced, said little. Men of his generation didn't discuss limbs that betrayed them. He thought maybe it was the cold air leaking through the old window frame, or the stiff chair he now used more often since the walks had stopped. A neighbor mentioned circulation, not in a medical way, just in passing, while handing him a bag of lemons across the fence. "Sitting too long? Blood doesn't like that," she said, her voice wrapped in scarf and steam. That night, Lester opened the drawer with the wool socks, the good ones, the ones she used to lay out without asking. He placed them beside the radiator and warmed them like old bread. Before bed, he slipped them on, then filled the hot water bottle and held it against his calves like an apology. The next morning, before the day asked anything of him, he walked 10 quiet laps around the kitchen, not as exercise, as offering. The sound of his steps was the only thing awake, and in that rhythm, something began to return. Warmth, yes, but also something older, a memory of movement not meant to prove, but to preserve. Now, even on the coldest mornings, Lester walks before coffee. The kettle hums while his socks kiss the linoleum. He doesn't count anymore, he just listens. Because the legs, when invited, have their own prayers, and the blood, when stirred with care, sings quieter in the night. Lestage 3. Magnesium, microdepletion, and food simplicity. There was a time when Margaret cooked full meals, baked squash with rosemary, steamed greens with garlic. Her counter once held jars of seeds and nuts, Her fridge always had something green. But lately, the kitchen had grown quieter, not from loneliness, just a kind of fading. Appetite had changed, so had energy. She began skipping steps, boiling instead of roasting, toast instead of bowls, crackers instead of color. Her body didn't protest at first, but then came the cramps, subtle, then insistent, especially at night, when stillness made every jolt louder. She assumed it was normal. Age, sleep. Another unkind whisper from joints and nerves. At a visit, her doctor asked about meals, what she ate, what she skipped, what had quietly disappeared. Then, gently, "Do you know where you're getting your magnesium?" She blinked. Hadn't thought of that word in years. He didn't lecture, just mentioned how certain nutrients, especially ones the muscles love, fade faster in older bodies, especially when meals become light. That evening, she stood at her stove longer than usual, sautéed spinach with oil, sprinkled sunflower seeds on warm lentils, ate slowly, with two hands wrapped around the bowl, like holding something returned. Before sleep, she curled her toes toward her chest, pressed her soles against the wall. No strain, just reminder. The cramps didn't vanish that night, but they didn't visit as sharply. Now, she keeps a small dish of pumpkin seeds beside her salt, not as medicine, as memory, of meals that once knew how to hold her and are learning again. Because sometimes the body isn't asking for more. It's asking for what it once had, but forgot to request. 4. Stillness, dehydration, and nighttime ritual. Harold didn't move much after sunset. The day had already asked enough. By evening, he sank into his chair, turned the lamp low, and let the hush settle into his joints. He wasn't tired, not exactly, just emptied. His water glass stayed full most nights. It sat on the end table, untouched, reflecting the TV screen more than his lips. When the cramps began, they came like sparks, not lightning, but static. A tightening in the calves, sometimes the arches, as if the muscles were clenching something he hadn't named. He'd wake from them, breathe through them, then fall back into sleep, as if nothing had happened. Until one morning, he couldn't stretch his heel without a tremble. A nurse he trusted said it simply, "You're not dry because you don't drink. You're dry because the body gives away more than it asks for at your age." It stuck with him, not because it scared him, but because it sounded true. That night, he warmed a mug of water with lemon, held it with both hands, drank it in the dark before brushing his teeth. Then he stood by the foot of the bed, lifted one heel, then the other, slow as moonlight. Nothing fancy, just a way to tell the legs they wouldn't be forgotten even when he slept. The cramps still came sometimes, but they no longer startled, they softened, and in time, they stopped waking him. Now, he drinks his warm water each night like a benediction. He presses his heels gently into the floor before pulling the covers. And sometimes, just before switching off the lamp, he says aloud, "I'm still listening." Because the body, even in stillness, wants to know it hasn't been left behind. There are kinds of loss that don't begin with funerals. They begin with what we stop noticing, what we stop asking, what we stop answering to. The body changes slowly, so slowly that we often grieve it too late. Not when it aches, but when it stops speaking altogether. We used to rise with breath. Now we rise with resistance. We used to move without thinking. Now we move around the thought that we might move wrong. And sometimes we stop moving at all. Not because we've given up, but because the rituals we once followed no longer ask for us to be present. We forget the water on the nightstand. We forget the breath before the step. We forget that even stillness has a rhythm if we meet it with attention. That forgetting, that slow silencing of sensation, is its own kind of grief. Not the sharp kind, not the kind others notice, but the kind that curls in the soft space between joints, waits in the dark behind the knees, whispers through cramps that come not to punish, but to remind that we once belonged to our bodies, that we still can, if we choose to come back, to the glass of water, to the slow stretch, to the moment before motion when we ask gently, "Are you with me?" And the body, quietly, faithfully, says yes. Even after we've ignored it, even after we've rushed past it, it still waits for the chance to carry us with presence instead of habit. Maybe the body was never asking us to be strong. Maybe it was only ever asking us to be present, to pause before the movement, to sit before the stretch, to acknowledge its effort before demanding more. So much of what we call aging isn't failure, it's forgetting. Forgetting that the body changes tempo and we forgot to change the music. We kept marching when it wanted to sway. We kept demanding when it asked to be met. And in that mismatch, we mistook slowness for weakness. We called pain the enemy when it was really a messenger. A letter arriving through the calf, delivered in a spasm, signed in magnesium and silence. But we can answer that letter, not with correction, with kindness. Because the body doesn't need a younger version of us. It needs the US that listens now. The US that sets the cup down before rising. That flexes the ankle just once, just to say, I'm still with you. We don't need to change everything. We just need to change how we enter the morning, how we enter the next movement, how we enter the relationship with the very frame that's carried us through it all. And when we do, when we soften instead of speed, when we breathe before deciding, we realize we haven't lost our strength. We've just lost our place in the rhythm. And the rhythm, it's still playing. It never left. It just slowed so we could hear it better. You don't need to conquer your mornings. You only need to return to them. The sit before the stretch, the pause before the rise, the moment before motion when nothing is required except noticing that you are still here, still waking, still learning what your body asks now that it has grown quieter. Leg cramps are not declarations. They're reminders that tension arrives where attention has been lost, that healing isn't always adding. Sometimes it's just remembering. You can remember differently now, with warm socks folded near the bed, with a dish of seeds beside your salt, with ankles rolled in darkness before your feet find the floor. None of it has to be perfect. None of it has to be daily. It only has to be honest. It only has to feel like kindness instead of obligation. And if you forget tomorrow, the body won't hold it against you. It will whisper again. It will wait. It always does. Because the relationship isn't built on obedience. It's built on reverence. The kind you offer to old trees and familiar songs and hands you've known forever. So, let your body be one of those things. Something sacred. Something worth listening to. Something you do not rush. If all you carry from this is a slower first step, or one breath before you move, that is enough. Because slowing isn't giving up, it's arriving. And if it feels right, we'll be here again, quietly beside you. Until next time, take one slower breath and take care of your story.